All right, it's odd for me to tell these creation stories seated, usually moving back and around the classroom, but it is what it is. So, I have two creation stories for you. The first comes from the Iroquois, and we could call it, if we went to, Woman Who Fell from the Sky. The second is a story that comes from the Cherokee, and we could call this one Grandmother Spider Brings the Sun. And what you want to think about as you hear these stories is, what are some common themes? What are some things that are similar about them? So the Iroquois believed that a long, long time ago, I always want to say in a galaxy far, far away, but that's a different creation story. So the Iroquois believed that a long, long time ago, the world was divided into two parts. All of the people lived in what we could call Sky World, and beneath Sky World was just water. Well, up in Sky World, there was a woman who was pregnant. And as happens sometimes when women are pregnant, she's experiencing some cravings. And so she's particularly craving the bark of a tree that stands in the center of Sky World, and it's sacred. You're not supposed to disturb this tree. But she manages to convince her partner to go get some bark from this tree for her. And when he does, takes a little bit of the bark, he actually exposes a hole in Sky World. He's kind of freaked out because this was a sacred tree, shouldn't have been bothering it. And so he returns to her, gives her the bark, and says like, oh, and just so you know, there's a hole in Sky World. So she's kind of curious. So she goes to check out the hole. But as she's looking at it, she loses her balance. She falls. Now, remember where she's headed? Just water beneath Sky World. Before she hits the water, birds catch her, and they place her on Turtle's back. Muskrat goes to the bottom of the ocean floor, picks up a little bit of the ocean floor, puts that on on Turtle's back. And when Woman Who Fell from the Sky initially fell, she tried to stop herself from falling, by trying to grab on the tree, but she just pulled off more branches and leaves and what have you. Now, remember, Woman Who Fell from the Sky was pregnant, so she ultimately gave birth to a daughter, and the two of them will begin walking on Turtle's back. They'll plant those pieces of the tree the Woman Who Fell from the Sky had pulled, and ultimately what they're creating is the world, right? Of the things that they plant from the tree, that will become our, trees and bushes and flowers and what have you. The Woman Who Fell from the Sky, she gave birth to a daughter, I said, and the two of them began walking, and the young girl grew up into a young woman. One day she was out walking, and she saw a man. She fainted, and when she woke, she had two arrows placed on top of her, and she was pregnant with twins who were constantly fighting in her womb. So much so that when the twins were born, one she gave birth to in the fashion in which women typically give birth, but the second child she gave birth to under her left arm. Now, since women don't typically give birth under their left arm, this killed her. She was buried, and from her head grew what the Iroquois call the Three Sisters. The Three Sisters is corn, beans, and squash. From her heart grew a sacred plant, and that's tobacco. So this is how the Iroquois understand their beginnings. Now, the Cherokee, again, long, long time ago, the world was divided into two parts, and one part of the world had light, but the other part of the world was still covered in darkness. So the animals get together and they say, this isn't fair. Why do they get all the sun? We want some light. So Possum says, let me try. Possum's going to go over to the other side of the world, take a little bit of sun, they'll never notice. He's going to put it in his big, beautiful, bushy tail. Now, if you've seen a possum today, he does not have a big, beautiful, bushy tail. And that's because when he went to the other side of the world, tried to steal a little bit of the sun, he burned off his fur. So Buzzard says, I know better than to go to the other side of the world and take a little bit of the sun and put it in my tail feathers. Buzzard says, I'm going to go to the other side of the world. I'll put a little bit of sun in my head feathers. They'll never notice. If you've seen a buzzard, you know where this is going. Buzzard burns off all his head feathers. So, Grandmother Spider says, let me try. Grandmother Spider crafts a beautiful clay pot. She puts it on her back. She goes to the other side of the world, takes a little bit of the sun, puts it in her pot, comes back to our side of the world, and brings us light. This, incidentally, is why when you see a spider's web, there's always that circle in the middle, because it's to remind us that from this Grandmother Spider came the sun, came our life. So you have those two stories, and what you want to think about are what are some of the main themes? What's significant? Where can we find connections between these two stories? And we're using these two stories to just try to have a very general, there's millions and millions of people here prior to contact with the Eastern Hemisphere, and they're very diverse and very different, but just to get a general idea of Native American culture through those stories. All right, if you have any questions, you can put those in the discussion board. Take care.